Everything's changing in PR these days, so now what? Your audience isn't just searching anymore, they're asking AI. And AI is answering with or without you. Today, we're talking GEO, not just the basics, but the actual work. How do you build narratives that survive AI compression? How do you stay visible when citation practices change overnight? Let's get into it.
Hi, James. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Tiffany. Excited for our chat today. GEO's a hot topic.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be the first of many episodes on this topic related to AI search and GEO, as we're calling it here at Sterling. So I'm excited to dig into it and would love to just start by recognizing the fact that there's a lot of data coming to the surface from a lot of different resources these days, which is making this topic not only really interesting and fun to talk about, but it's allowing us to be pretty actionable in the work that we do. So I'm kind of excited to dig in and start talking about what the data around generative AI search and or GEO as we're calling it is telling us so far.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely changing how we think about the way that we put messaging together and the way we engage different types of media outlets. So yeah, I'm excited to kind of talk about the data, as you said, and how that shows up in the work we do each day.
Yeah, so it's so interesting because what we're hearing at a very top level from a lot of the resources that we're tapping into, like Muckrack and Full Intel, just to name a few, is that non-paid media is really starting to account for about 94% of the citations that we're seeing in AI. So that's pretty big for those of us who are in the earned and owned media landscape. So I'm curious to know, as we're talking about this, like how is it shifting our work as communicators, and what are we starting to advise clients on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the importance of earned and owned media has, it's always been important and it remains important because those are obviously, as you just said, really highly used inputs for what AI engines kind of surface as results. But what is perhaps different is that the messaging and the positioning work that goes into kind of any foundational PR program now has a little bit of added importance and urgency because once you put something out there, maybe it's not your perfectly 100% polished messaging, but you're going to kind of figure it out along the way. Well, that's an input now that AI is going to pull from. And if you're kind of trying out different types of messages for, here and there, and you're trying to kind of boil the ocean, you're talking about this audience and that audience, just confuse these LLMs, right? And the results that you're going to get back or that somebody searching for you and trying to understand your business is going to get back is going to be really kind of clouded and confusing, right? So it's important to remember that like AI isn't this new channel that you can kind of manipulate. It's an amplification tool of what is already out there. The first kind of takeaway is that it's really important that messaging is clear and consistent. Sounds obvious, but it matters more now than ever because those AI engines aren't going to cut you any slack, right? Before AI, you might have a certain message in a publication, right? And, if somebody didn't see that article or whatever it is, they'll miss whatever it is you were trying to say, right? Well, now AI is not going to let them miss that anymore. And so it's important to just be really, really consistent in what it is you're saying. If you have different types of audiences or different types of industries that you're trying to sell to, well, you've got a certain message for a fintech audience and you've got a certain message for a health tech audience, right? You've got to be really consistent in each of those channels, and you can't try to kind of marry the two because you're just going to confuse and send kind of clouded signals. So that's a noticeable change in the work that we're doing right now, and it's all about building that credibility kind of over and over and over, right? So that you become really known for that one thing or, those three really kind of easily digestible things.
Yeah. You hit on something that I think is really important here. 2 points. There's the consistency for sure. And then there's the clarity. And it's the clarity in the messaging as well as how it's delivered, right? And one of the things that came out in the latest Muckrack update around what AI is reading is the fact that press releases are seeing, a 5 times more uptick in being cited on the AI sources. And it's not because suddenly the press release is that much more valuable or different in the content that it produces. But what AI likes about it is the structure, and it allows for the summarization and the synthesizing of the data and the important points really quickly. And so we're starting to see a resurgence there, which I think is really funny because you and I have both been in tech PR for a long time. And I can remember early on starting at Sterling when the predictions were telling us that the press release is dead, that just another year or two and we will never have a press release again because of, internet media and things like that. And it hasn't died. I've been in the industry for 23 years almost, and all of a sudden it's having this resurgence, which I think is pretty funny in a lot of ways, but it speaks to where the press release has been really strong, and the fact that it does help the large language models synthesize and organize the information in a way that supports how people are using AI in looking for answers and doing that quickly. And so I think that's pretty interesting. I'm
Yeah.
curious to know, like, how does that fold into, the timing of our releases and what we're putting in the structure that we're augmenting.
I think you hit on a really good point about the structure, right? So the fundamentals of the narratives that we build have to be really sound, right? And again, like we see so many people in our industry on LinkedIn talking about how AI, is um, closing down the amount of time it takes to pressure test certain narratives that they're building, right? Like it's seen as kind of a shortcut to a number of things. And while it can, like, I guess help us be more efficient, like it's not going to hide the fact that if you don't have a really clear, concise solution to the problem that you're trying to solve, and that's reflected in your messaging, like you said, that you're missing an opportunity to kind of clearly define who you are, right? And those models depend on that structure. So again, like if you have a problem, you need to have a really clear solution, right? And everything else around that, like all the kind of flowery language and fluff, is just more kind of static for an LLM to get confused by, right? So clarity, concision, and just really clean structure. Like we've seen data that like FAQs, right? Really simple question and answer formats on websites or in blogs, right? Owned channels. Those are really helpful in instructing LLMs. Like it's easier for an LLM to understand and decipher what it is you're doing. So that's a really great point you bring up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the data is also amplifying the fact that journalism is alive and well and really important in the decision making process for all of us, whether we're doing our own personal research or we're looking for the tools and vendors that support our work, or even researching the backstory on a company we might want to invest in.
Yep.
And the data shows that, right? Journalism's driving 20 to 30% of AI citations right now. And how do you, as a strategic comms pro, how are you highlighting that importance of the third party validation with your clients on
Yeah.
the day to day?
Yeah. So again, the basics and the fundamentals still matter and matter more than ever, right? Data is super important. It's not enough, like, and a journalist will tell you this too, right? If you pitch something without like a customer quote or some data to substantiate what you're talking about, they're not going to give you the time of day, right? Journalists also are writing things they want, cited in by AI, right? And they want to optimize their content to be easily discoverable as well. And so it's critical to have that third party validation that again, language LLM can see, like, all right, that has evidence behind it, right? Or that has a client referral quote, on it, so that there's that third party validation. So when we talk to our clients, before we do anything, before we go pitch, whatever story it is that we want to go pitch, right? Like we're asking those questions. What do we have that we can use to substantiate this, right? And that's always been true. That's always how we've operated, but it matters more than ever. Again, there's less room for error here. And if you want your story to land the way you want it to land, you need those ingredients. They're non-negotiable anymore. And so that's definitely a key kind of piece in how we plan, how we pitch things. The other thing is, right, like getting coverage for the sake of coverage is really no longer the goal, right? A lot of times we'll get a new company or new client that they don't have much of a media profile, right? And so they're just like, any coverage is good coverage. We just want to get our name out there. That's a really common kind of thing that we hear. And while the intention is maybe in a good place, right? Again, just kind of spraying and praying and hoping to get coverage wherever you can get it is not really going to help your results in a AI search, right? You want to be in the right outlets where your audiences and your customers and investors are reading, right? You want to establish those executives as thought leaders that have really clear, articulate points of view on the topics and issues that matter in their industries, right? And you want those articles placed in publications that, are read by the right audiences, right? So we've got to be a little bit more surgical these days about where we recommend our clients try to get coverage or where we try to get coverage for them. A lot of times it was like, hey, can you just get me in TechCrunch? And it's like, well, why do you want to be in TechCrunch, right? Like those questions and kind of aligning on, all right, this is why we want to go be in this, outlet. And this is what we want to go say in that outlet. You got to get all those ducks in a row and get the client to understand and agree to that approach, right? Before you get too far down the road. Otherwise, you're just kind of putting stuff out there and kind of hoping and praying. And again, we've talked about how hoping and praying in the day or in the age of AI is a recipe for just kind of ho-hum results.
And the data that's coming out also supports the fact that we don't have to always be going after the tier one media outlets. So digging into the niche trade pubs a lot of times is more valuable for our particular clients in deep tech and healthcare and AI, because that's where folks are listening the most. That's where they're spending their time. We have such limited time to pay attention to what's going in to the news and stay up to date on our industry, and let alone look into new industries. We're going to go to those trusted sources that speak our language. That's not always the top tiers. The TechCrunches, New York Times, the Wall Street Journals. Sometimes we need to dig in to the verticals that really make the most amount of sense. And, we're seeing that come through in the data. And as PR professionals, seeing a little bit of that validation of our work beyond the high profile targets, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing is we talk about like timing, right? And how AI models kind of like how they ingest data, right? And the sources that they cite. And we've seen the data, right? That the most recent stuff is usually what gets surfaced first in results. The first 7 days of something being published has the highest citation rate. Again, like publications with higher domain authority get surfaced higher in results. So we got to be really mindful about which outlets we go after and how we time announcements. So I think there's this kind of point of friction, right? About like, you always want to be like doing something, right? To make sure you're kind of keeping the engine running, but you also want to be careful about like flooding too much out there. Again, like if you're just babbling on about whatever is happening in your industry and you're not kind of anchoring that back to the, specific clear, concise messaging points that's at the foundation of what you do. Again, you're kind of creating noise just for the sake of noise. There's an issue, there's an interesting kind of point there where we have to kind of work with our clients to figure out what the right cadence of information is and what are the right channels, right? How do we blend earned media with owned media, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when we first engage with clients, we talk about building a story matrix and a content calendar. That stuff's really important now because you don't want to like start executing and then get into a place where we haven't said anything of importance in the last 3 months, right? Or we've got these two announcements that are really close to each other, in the next month, right? So how do we kind of make sure that we're building into that and we have content to kind of keep the tap, running afterwards, right? So that's those are important considerations too these days.
Yeah, and I think we have to make sure that we're not assuming we always know how the large language models are working these days, because when they were first introduced to us a few years ago, they were trained on data that was fairly old, and we were doing research on data that was fairly old. That paradigm has shifted, and like you said, the models are being updated really frequently. They're relying on recent news and within the last 11 months, fresh information that has been posted in various channels. So not just news coverage, not just your corporate blog, not just research sites or government sites. It's interesting how quickly that is has changed from like that warning that we had when we were using the models at first, going, hey, this data is kind of old, make sure you fact check. And you do that, you still need to fact check, but the data is so getting refreshed so quickly that it's keeping us on our toes.
Yeah, for sure. When we talk about measurement and measuring success in this new day and age, right? I think this is maybe where we've seen kind of the biggest change or the biggest shift impacted by GEO. Traditionally, a decade ago, we kind of measured media success as in the number of eyeballs that might have seen that, right? Number of impressions, number of media hits that we've secured in a certain month or a certain quarter, right? That stuff's definitely dead. It's been dead for a while, but now it's really, really dead. And I think now we're kind of measuring success in less like numerical, quantitative ways and more like, all right, are we seeing our message resonate with the stakeholders and the influencers within that space, right? Our analysts, when they're talking about us, are analysts using the type of messaging and the point of view that our clients want to get across? When clients get feedback from customers or prospects, right? What are they hearing, or what are their assumptions of what it is the client does? Like, are those aligned? Does the end customer think they're getting something else? We had an example that we've talked about a couple of times where one of our clients provides a service to healthcare organizations, right? And their messaging is that they have that they transform these health systems so much that patient care is like directly impacted in a positive way, right? There's better patient outcomes because of all of the because of all of their technology enables. We talked to one of their end customers as we were writing a case study for them. And they were like, yeah, we don't actually get that value. We use them to, kind of keep the plumbing working in the back end, right? They say that stuff, but we don't really resonate with that, or we don't really get that value out of them. That provided a real opportunity for us to go back to the client and say, hey, whatever you're saying and whatever they're getting out of it is misaligned, and there's something to work on there, right? Client has gone back and kind of reassessed how it is they talk about their technology, doubling down on the things they want to make sure they get across, but also meeting those end customer concerns head on, right? So that's the kind of more qualitative feedback and measurement that I think carries way, way more weight than any of those kind of vanity metrics that we used to use back in the day.
Absolutely.
That's a definite shift of that AI, and the rapid rate that information is exchanged has definitely had that impact.
Well, and it goes back to the consistency component that we were talking about earlier, and ensuring that your messaging and that narrative tracks not only in the new stuff that you're doing with new case studies or press releases, media interviews, but what is your website saying about you? And is that in alignment? Because that's showing up in the large language model searches as well. And so if somebody does a search on you and tell me more about this company, and they see conflicting information about how you talk about yourself on your website and what they're seeing in some of the third party coverage about you or about your industry, if there's misalignment there, there's a trust issue that is going to percolate from that. And so making sure that you go back to the stuff that you have control over, of that owned media, and ensure that it's aligned with where your company is right now and what you're saying about yourself and how your industry has changed, to demonstrate that you're on point with that. And that takes time to do, but it's an important part of that process. Is as much as we always want to look forward and build on what we're doing, we also need to reflect back to make sure that we're updating what's important on that end.
Yeah. And that's such a good point. And it has to be consistent. That messaging has to be consistent through kind of all levels of the company too, right? Like so many times, like the CEO is having direct conversations with customers and prospects, or head of sales, or whoever it is, right? And whatever it is that we're using as our key messaging on the PR side has to match with those like direct conversations the CEO is having, right? Because those conversations are what's moving their business forward on a, from a sales perspective, right? If we're not also echoing that and supporting those conversations through our messaging, then we're pulling in two different directions, and that bogs the whole thing down, and again creates opportunities for confusion for AI models. So one of the things that's really important to consider, and is actually a little bit of a shift in mindset for us as the PR pros here, is we got to keep in mind that a number of our clients work in really complex, technically complex industries that have a lot of regulatory requirements, a lot of security requirements, right? And so when we first engage with them, there's a lot of kind of technical terminology that we need to get comfortable with, right? The vocabulary is a little different. And I think what our industry generally would, when we encounter a client that's got a lot of kind of complex language that's not super easy to understand, the first thing we tend to want to do is make it really simple so that anybody can understand what it is that they're talking about, right? In the day of AI, if we go too far down that road trying to make something that's complex and technical simple, and we're not using the right vocabulary, again, we're not sending the right signals to the industry and the customers and the analysts, right, that matter to our client's business. We're doing them a disservice if we're not using the same language and the same terminology. AI is just going to echo back whatever messaging we put out there, right? And if we're putting out overly simplified messaging that doesn't show that we really truly deeply understand what it is our clients do and the problems that they solve, that gets reflected in the results, right? That AI will spit back. You want to kind of fight the urge to like say, oh, you're the X of this, right? Or you're the Y of that. Again, overly simplifying things, you might help, your neighbor understand what it is that your clients do, but that's not who matters, right? You need to be able to kind of speak the right language. And so that takes a lot of research and practice and understanding on our end at the beginning of an engagement with a client to really dig deep and understand what matters most in their industry and to talk that way. But again, doing it in an authentic, concise, repeatable manner.
Yeah, because oversimplifying for the sake of clarity runs the risk of misinformation. And then we certainly don't want to do that. We need to be as accurate and helpful as we can without clogging up the language models and the searches with information that just isn't correct. So yeah, I love that, and we have to maintain that level of authenticity, like you said, with clients and with their audiences through every medium that we're reaching them.
Yeah, the authenticity is really important. One of the things that we've been saying a lot lately around here is, being heard is kind of table stakes, but being trusted and understood, that's the part that really matters most. And that's what our messaging and all of our tactical execution has to map towards. It always has to be that authentic voice that end stakeholders can trust.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, fundamentals haven't changed. We're always going to need narrative that is clear and credible and consistent, and just realize that the systems that are amplifying those fundamentals are really what's changing and what we're adjusting to. It's an interesting time in comms for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it'll be different in 3 months from now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to continue the conversation for sure. And this is just the start of it. And yeah, it's great to break down the data with you and to think about what that actually means for our clients and our prospects. So yeah, it's been a really great conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
Yep, me too. Thanks.